So now, folks, we're going to move into the next session on emerging research. And we are aware that we are in incredible times of change, uncertainty, volatility, and yet many of us work in, the work integrated learning units to support students in their navigation of, contributions to the community, as Joe was mentioning, social work contexts of our world. And so it's within these contexts, okay, of all of our practices that there's been really a growing need for research in the college sector. And although the college sector represents polytechnics, institutes, CEGEPs, and colleges, we're seeing unique factors arise that set us apart from universities in Canada. And so we heard some of that even in the beginning of the panel today. So today I am so excited to be hosting our next session with 3 topics. It was extremely challenging, I have to say, folks, to narrow it down for even this symposium, and you'll only be hearing maybe highlights of their incredible insights that each of them have. However, there is a need for more research in the college sector. And as you hear from our colleagues, I invite you to think about the questions that may arise. Perhaps this could inspire you with your further questions about your practices and other research. So for an example, like when I started asking some questions a few years ago about the research that supported our assumptions and practices, I was actually quite shocked at the brevity of materials on this sector. For some of you that may have joined our recent research webinar series, you'll see one of the research projects that I participated in leading to a contribution in the new publication, The Practice and Research of Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning in the Canadian Context, which is on the CEWIL website. Yet, folks, there's a small representation of the college sector research, okay? And it is this that inspires me to be part of the solution. And today is part of seeing how we can profile colleagues in the amazing work they've done on this sector. So we're going to have each present for 10 minutes with a short time for Q&A at the end for all 3. Okay, so stay tuned. You can also ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll deal with it there. As mentioned at the beginning of the symposium, though, please use the Q&A function to ask questions for the presenters. Okay, you're welcome to share your thoughts, ideas, and perceptions in the chat. So let me begin with Laura Thurzel of Algonquin College and Arif Tour of OISE, U of T. Laura is a full-time professor at Algonquin College in the School of Media and Design, and she teaches and develops curriculum in graduate certificates, diplomas, degrees. She's coordinated multiple certificate programs, including internships. She's earned 2 Algonquin College Innovation Fund Awards and used to conduct engagement research on the impact of remote learning. And she's looked at college-wide cross-departmental research on the engagement potential of new teaching technology. So for more than 20 years, Laura has worked in industry with multinational organizations. And in her graduate studies, she studied intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, conducted research on the engagement of students in a university program. And in 2015, she published her engagement research through the lens of graduate certificates in Ontario, entitled Graduate Certificates in Ontario Colleges. So she's going to be speaking a little bit more to that. And Dr. Tour is a business professor, entrepreneur, and mentor. He's been teaching business-related courses for over 15 years to students in 4 countries. He's a practitioner of the participatory style of learning and always tries to implement this philosophy into his classes. He has a PhD in leadership from Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at U of T. And his interests are vocational education, qualifications, and their role in market economies and the role of entrepreneurs in the Canadian economy. Some of his research has had particular significance to what is going on in the college sector. And so together they're going to share this next time. I turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sean, for the wonderful symposium, putting everybody and their work together. Thank you so very much. So folks, my name is Arif, and the slides that I'm going to share with you today are actually extracted from my PhD thesis and the presentation that I had there, I had to cut a few short in terms of just focusing on the work integrated learning and how Ontario's graduate certificate programs, in my opinion, are an example of WIL curricula at Ontario colleges. Just a little bit of background. I know I only have 10 minutes, so I'd like to keep it as brief as possible. The reason I want you to look at the Ontario graduate programs is because they are the programs with the highest employability rates in the 80% in terms of the whole system. In fact, in college sectors, the undergraduate degrees are even lower in terms of the employment rates, graduate employment rates. So I was intrigued to know about these programs. I wanted to find out what is so special about them, how were they created, and what is the actual connection between these programs and the labor market. As Sean mentioned in the introduction, my key interests are looking into the qualifications and trying to explore what makes them different. And in case of graduate certificate programs, I was happy to see it is the actual WIL component that makes them different in many, many aspects. So again, just a little bit of background of my study. I tried to understand the role of graduate certificates in Ontario's transition system. The transition system is the institutional arrangement of how young people find jobs, so how they transition from education to labor market. I also learned that the bachelor's degree or baccalaureate is one of the key admission requirements. Of course, that is not what all the graduate certificates require you to do, but about 80% of the admissions were given to students with baccalaureate degrees. So of course, that was one of the key requirements there. This is the theoretical framework that I used, transition systems definition by Iannelli and Raff. And then they talk about two kind of institutional arrangements. One, where we see a clear link between qualifications and the labor market. In their terminology, they call this the employment logic. And the other one where there are loose links between education and the labor market, of course, known as the education logic. Now, in Canada, we do have the application of employment logic in almost all the regulated professions. So whatever you have to do at work after you graduate is taught to you during your years of study at school or college or university, whatever way, shape, and form it is. However, in our post-secondary education system, especially the college sector, as well as the university sector, we follow the education logic. Yes, colleges are the flagship bearers for applied learning and applied teaching. However, if you look at the links between the labor market and the qualifications, they are largely through the program advisory committees. And that's it. So again, that's another area where I think more work has to be done to really implement true spirit of WIL. And I think earlier in one of the panels, our participants were talking about universities send students to colleges and colleges send students to universities. As we all know, in Ontario, the original plan for colleges was not really to feed students to universities. But here we do see lots of students after they've graduated from universities coming back to colleges for that applied touch that, that I earlier mentioned. So of course, reverse transfer and differentiation were also topics of my research. And I did conduct some interviews with students using Perna's student choice model. And the key finding, of course, from the students' point of view was they go back to colleges because they did not learn the applied skills at their university degrees. So again, connection with the work integrated learning was very, very clear in the responses that I got from the students as well as from the institutional leaders. So there was a mixture of data collected, both qualitative and quantitative. The quant data was collected from the 335 Ontario Graduate Certificate Program websites. I'm sure there are more than 335 today. At that time, of course, in fall of 2017, that's how much the number was. And then there was enrollment data that was provided to me by the other institutions. Sorry. So I wanted to find out what is the actual nature of these programs and then how they connect with the work integrated learning or the labor market in a broader sense. So first, I was happy to see that all 24 English language colleges are offering graduate certificate programs. The number of programs and the duration was in flux, and I think it still is. There was 73.3% of the programs, a majority of them were 1 year, although there were some programs for over 2 years, which I was told that they're essentially designed for the international students. So they can probably, help them even more. There was some for 4 months even, and then again, most were 2 academic semesters or 1 academic year. The focus was on work integrated learning. 74% of the programs that I reviewed had work placement. And that was wonderful for me to see. Now, they provide a pathway into occupation. So of course, if you are not able to learn the tricks of the trade of occupations at college, it will be very difficult for the students to find jobs after they graduate. There was some ambiguity about where the Ontario Qualifications Framework reports it, based on the tabular form that OQF follows. But I don't think we have to talk too much about that today. Maybe we can move it some other time. Here are the interesting facts that I was referring to earlier that kind of pushed me towards looking deeper into this credential. The enrollment data and the overall employment rate are very positive. And as I was saying, they're actually higher than the degrees in Ontario. But again, there are some further tensions that I observed when I was doing the analyses. Not everybody was able to find jobs in their field of study. So that kind of pushes back the argument towards perhaps there is something else in the institutional arrangement that is helping these students find jobs and not what they are learning at colleges. But again, the broader conclusion was that it is absolutely amazing credential, which is helping 82% students 2 years after graduation find jobs. That is something which is unprecedented in our system. I'm sure that college system now in like maybe 5 years after graduation or 10 years after graduation, the employment rate might be in the 90s, as one of the earlier presenter was saying. But when I looked at the data, 2 years after graduation, the rate for graduate certificate programs were in the 80s, and that's spot on. We still need to make sure that the WIL involvement is more than just having a a role for the program advisory committees. I think what we need is a better curriculum design that is going to help labor market players have a better say in what is being taught at colleges. And I'm really happy to learn about the previous presenters' topic, and what they told us, that there have been a lot of work done and in the same umbrella, and I'm so thrilled what will come out of it eventually. So
Arif?
that's the end of my talk
Excellent. Yeah.
here. Thank
If
you
we
for
could
that. Yes,
just
Sean.
turn it over to Laura so she can take a couple of minutes to share some highlights from hers. And Chad, if you
Absolutely,
could just be
Laura.
ready, we'll come on with Chad in just a moment. So go ahead, Laura.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to handle her slides as well, but over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Sure, great. And I'll shorten a bit so you can move ahead there to the next slide. Arif, thank you. As you heard Arif talk about graduate certificates in Ontario, we know that they seem to have a bit of a homogeneous design. In the research that I did, I looked at various elements of student engagement research and how they build student engagement, specifically graduate certificates. The two elements I looked at were extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. It's the intrinsic motivation, those motivators that are inherently in us, not the external rewards, but the intrinsic motivators that are especially engaging. So if you go ahead, this is my last piece here. So when we have extrinsic rewards, be it the graduate certificate itself, or even the WIL, the co-op, the WIL initiatives, the field placements, etc., the thing to do is find relevance in that reward. So when it's extrinsic, it's attaching meaning to the co-op placement. It's attaching meaning to the graduate certificate. Why are you taking it in the first place? What's that co-op for? What job do you want to get? So attaching meaning builds engagement among students. That's the research shows. And in fact, the opposite is true. If you focus too much on the rewards, it actually disengages students. So from an extrinsic point of view, yes, giving meaning to the co-op, the placement, the job. If you go to the next piece, if you click further on the slide. So from an intrinsic point of view, there are many different layers that garner deep engagement, but especially self-determination. So when students have autonomy, they have flexibility, they can understand the expectations of the WIL initiative, let's say, or even the graduate certificate, they're more engaged. It's the deeper level of emotional engagement that they have. So this speaks as well to universal design for learning and other areas of thought. But the research shows that for WIL, for co-ops, field placements, etc., we need to attach just abilities for flexibility and being able to have choice. The social interaction comes from being able to connect with others in the workplace. So when you go into those co-ops, those field placements, being able to connect with employers, colleagues in the work setting, all of that motivates the students in their WIL learning. And then lastly, it's not only the design in the graduate certificate or the WIL initiatives in the grad certs, but it's the way that professors, administrators, and others lead it. So it's the individual considerations. So earlier we were talking about which WIL placement do we have? Which co-op should a student have? It's about how do you consider that is very important from an engagement point of view. The research points to the fact that it's important to engage students by choosing the right placement for them, and then also stimulate them intellectually in that placement itself. So those really are the highlights, very short, of what I would want to share. Further research is needed to be done around how different cultures engage with WIL, both graduate certificates and beyond. So hopefully that's of help. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Arif and Laura. And folks, you may have some questions that you can put in the Q&A, which we will look at the finale of our three presentations on emerging research. So we could come back to Laura and Arif later. But next, I would like to introduce you to Chad Monday of Loyalist College. Now, Chad's a college administrator, part-time faculty member who has worked across a variety of portfolios, earning his PhD and master's from Queen's University and an MBA from Wilfrid Laurier. Chad has committed himself to lifelong learning and has a deep appreciation for the complexities of the college environment and how various departments work together to create the best learning opportunities for students. So as someone who always thinks about how staff and students are achieved when a decision is made, he champions a people first approach to achieving results. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Chad.
Hi, everyone. It's like teaching, right? With the black screens, and at least there's more happening in the chat. So I'll share my screen and we'll get started. So I studied in the PhD program. I was given a grant in my administrator role for work integrated learning, and I didn't really know what that was. And so I kind of undertook a program because why not? We all work in post-sec in some capacity, and the inspiration that you get when you enter into anything new, I just thought I'll make it a program, and Queen's was on board to help me do that. So I explored how specific WIL activities provoke changes in students' conceptions and experiences of learning. And what that meant for me was I wanted to know that a student engages in a WIL activity, and because we have such cross definitions that institutions use, but not everyone follows, I wanted to get a sense of those WIL activities and the influences that they may have on students. And whether students even understand that they're engaged in a WIL activity. I was able to gain approval because I felt that there was a dearth of research with the Ontario college context, because the universities are pretty spectacular in their staffing levels, at least, you know, the administrators that I meet and the faculty that are given time to participate in WIL, and the numbers can be smaller. And then the amount of co-op support, or if that's one of the WIL activities that's shared, is also equally as valuable. Where in the college system, it might not be the same. I wanted to clear up terms to see how students interpreted it. And then knowing that it's an important component for us in post-sec, it even spoke to sort of our priorities moving forward as our college and colleges in general in Ontario. I used a situated learning theory framework, and that was really to gain further insight into research questions related to all aspects of WIL, in particular the authenticity context, and any interactions that happened under the student's activity that I could then kind of cross compare to see whether field placement was different than co-op, was different than a service learning project or an applied project, and what those look like. Because as an administrator, I'm at an arm's length, so I can only rely on what I know to come from feedback from faculty or students. So I wanted to gain a better insight from the student end to kind of see how that worked. And then I also wanted to add the self-directed learning part to it, because our students that are doing WIL and participating in WIL, experiencing WIL, there's a self-directed component to it that we need to ensure is well captured. These were my research questions. Again, I wanted 3 components. I wanted the conceptions of learning, I wanted self-directiveness in WIL, and then I wanted anything in the WIL environment related to social and physical aspects that would influence a student's learning process. I chose a mixed method multiple case study approach, and I used SPSS and NVivo 11 to do my mixed methods analysis. So when I went through the survey results, when I went through the journals, when I went through some of the interview pre-COVID data, it seemed that for the most part, because it was contexted in School of Business, is that there was a low task authenticity and low proximity to workplace. And that's a great model and an axis that really helps frame some of the lower authenticity experiences, but maybe low proximity to the workplace with a high task authenticity, and gives you a range that then you can operate in. And that was really interesting by researchers out of Australia that proposed that framework. I think it was Cater was one of the main researchers. And the fact that there was that peripheral participation in a WIL, because there were so many students, they may not have actually benefited or gained a lot of the learning outcomes that we hope students gain from a one-on-one co-op model. And that these ideas of stolen knowledge or invisibles of practice there's a separation from the learning environment that it was difficult for these students to grasp, because a lot of them actually participated in something that was called a simulated will, where we could not find will opportunities that were grounded in a low proximity to workplace. So they were removed from that because of the sheer volume. And so when you think about a college system that's outside of maybe a major urban center, you're very limited in some of the disciplines that you can find these more one-on-one traditional field placement or co-op experiences for students. And so seeing that the results also indicated that multiple will opportunities for a student actually increase their ability to learn self-directed skills. And I thought that that was a really interesting component, that we don't have students that long in the college system, yet having multiple will experiences for them, it actually improved their ability to participate in will, because the students that were involved were not used to having such a self-directed model that required that high level of regulation. Though where I felt that I contributed to theory, and my one little thing I did here, was the idea that, yes, we knew that learning environments are not just peripheral participation, that you need to be actively engaged in it through immersion, but that the students being active agents within the environment, that there's more shaping that happens with the reflection in action or the reflection on action, and that we do require a workplace connection if we want to maintain the integrity of will and have that academic quality framework for will that we need in the college system. And it's not simply okay to say a student has participated in will just because the course is founded in will, and then just calling it a simulated will if we can't find an actual will that we intended to find. And so I think that that is something that we're able to explore further, especially when we consider emerging research or how we want to move forward. So having a cleaner definition of what is going to be will and what is not going to be will. Do all programs need will? What kind of knowledge are we expecting the students in the discipline to be able to gain from the will and extract from and use from their learning environments at the college in these other learning environments? Having more reflection assessments, as we know, journals are one of the most tried and tested methods for running into this. And so those invisibles of practice are stolen knowledge. And how do we capture those in our assessments to make sure that students are gaining the skills that the learning outcomes are directed for in that will, and making sure that we can scaffold, if possible, even if it's small, in the short time that they're at the college system, and then definitely anything that's simulated outside of maybe a healthcare program needed further examination in terms of quality. When we think in terms of limitations for studies, it's always important to put up that I had 3 cases, but one of the data in the cases of applied project was weak. I was having to rely on multiple faculty members to collect the data because of my position at the college as the chair. And it is dedicated to one research site, so the context may be different, and that there were a high proportion of international students who completed it, and because the survey may not have been clearly articulated, it wasn't scraped in terms of that, in terms of the presentation of the survey in the language. So something that I used as an example for students is you see Times Square, but then when you use the example of being able to immerse yourself in it, it was the idea of will. And like, could we have something that allowed them to be more immersed as opposed to giving them a will simulation without actually having any movement or active participation in the environment? So the international student realm, we know from the college system, this is sort of where our students are coming from. And for our context, a majority coming from India. Well, when we think about this study and the future research in the college system, it's about the business programs that I'm interested in, and primarily having the students from India, and how do we support students from India in business programs, because we have multiple intakes and many business programs, huge enrollment. We're a smaller, medium-sized capacity college with a local catchment area that we can't absorb all of those opportunities. And that those balance of perspectives in the classroom, you could have a program with 3 students who are coming from your local region with 80 students who are coming from one region in India. And what does that look like when you get to that will experience throughout that program? Good learning happens, but it does create a different but a balanced perspective that's required. What are the resources required to manage all of these wills? Because we did put them in the program, but we don't actually know if the students are participating in the way that we hope, because we have to get these students through because they signed up with us and they're producing meaningful learning. But if we don't have those will opportunities to offer them, that is not the student's fault. And what is the capacity of employer industry? So then as a team, what we looked at is the future. Maybe we don't have WIL in every program, but maybe we have just equally as beneficial opportunities for students to gain employment. So whether that's through the professional portfolio job ready exercise, as opposed to that being woven, yeah, formatively, it'll be done throughout the program, but maybe instead of sending the student out into a WIL opportunity, there's an elective model where you can participate in a WIL, you could participate in a more robust portfolio exercise, or maybe you're going to do a service learning project with a group of students, and that can help alleviate some of those resource constraints, because field placements, especially being an unpaid model and students maybe not having transportation, it becomes very difficult for them to participate in some cases, especially when we are talking about those projects even, and how many students need an opportunity to benefit from WIL. And some students in the study did indicate that they didn't have any connection to industry, just guest speakers, which wasn't enough that we saw that beautiful engineering University of Waterloo traditional model of co-op. That's not something we can replicate in this current context. And that's something that I'm interested to continue to explore. And how do we then evaluate, which is that quality assurance piece of our initiatives, to look at those mandatory and elective models, and did the students mirror the learning that we hoped they did from that, our true sense of WIL that we would love them to have, with high proximity to the workplace, high task authenticity that related to their chosen profession, employment, vocational learning standard, and seeing where that goes. And so lastly, it was about looking at how do we have a different pitch to the employer that allows our students to be able to gain knowledge, but the employer who's investing their time to gain something as well. And then looking at that length of the program and how long those students are with us. So if they're only with us 1 or 2 years, it limits the opportunities that are available. All right. I don't exactly know how much time that took, Sean. So hopefully that was 10 minutes.
Yeah, just a little over, but we're chasing the clock here.
Thank you.
It's just incredible, the amount of insights that we all have to share. And so thank you so much, Chad. And so folks, if you want to continue to add your questions to the Q&A, I know some of our presenters here can actually be responding to those questions as we're going along. And so finally, for our third and final presentation, I would like to introduce to you Amy Kaufman and Ken Chatur of HECO. And Amy is the Director of Research and Policy at HECO, who manages staff and internal research projects with a focus on post-secondary education system design and improvement. And with 20 years of experience in Ontario's higher education system, she's worked in policy development, analysis, advocacy, government relations, strategic planning, and institutional accountability. Amy's interested in evidence-based decision-making and strategic improvement, and she holds a BA in political science from University of Guelph and an MA in political science from the University of Toronto. Now, Ken is a senior researcher at HECO as well, who works on projects related to universal design for learning, access programs, social mobility, and work-integrated learning. He also has led projects related to students with disabilities, first-generation students, and apprenticeships. Ken holds a Master's of Science from McGill, where he conducted research to develop new therapies for brain cancer. He previously participated in research on the quality of life for individuals with complex needs and biomedical engineering. So I'm going to turn it over to you two to take it from here. Well, it's okay if we go just a little bit past the time frame. We're falling a little bit behind, but we'll catch up in a little bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean, and good afternoon, everybody. As you know, Ken and I are part of the research team at the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. You probably know us as HECO, and that's how we'll refer to ourselves today. And we're so pleased to have been invited to participate. We're learning a lot, and it is always a real treat for us to connect with folks from other Canadian jurisdictions. So thank you very much. HECO is an arm's length agency of the Ontario government. Our mandate is to contribute evidence-based research to inform the ongoing improvement of the post-secondary education sector. And to do that, we focus our work on quality, access, and system improvement. We work with partners including school boards, colleges and universities, the ministry, and community and stakeholder groups. And our interest in WIL is not new. Over the years, we've worked with organizations like Education and Work Integrated Learning Ontario, or EWO, see some familiar names here today, as well as institutions and other WIL researchers. And we've explored questions related to barriers to work integrated learning, the pathways of WIL graduates, as well as faculty perspective of work integrated learning. So we've heard quite a lot today about the ongoing national interest in WIL. Both levels of government have invested in funding, and we've heard a bit about the impact of that. WIL is often positioned as a tool to help students prepare for the world of work. On-the-job training, exposure to workplace norms, and networking opportunities make it easier for graduates to access and succeed in a dynamic and ever-changing labor market. WIL is also considered a way to help address the perceived skills gap, which is the concern that graduate skills are not aligned with the needs of the labor market. And finally, WIL could be a way to help students gain experience and develop transferable skills to increase their job readiness once they graduate. So I'm going to turn things over to Ken to talk about the current phase of our work in this space.
Thanks, Amy. So let's talk about the projects. The first project I'll talk about is WIL and the online shift, which we're calling Challenges and Lessons Learned from the Online Shift in Work Integrated Learning. At the core of this project is a question: what have we learned from the online shift that we can use moving forward? And the key words there are moving forward. While this project is about the online shift during the pandemic, we believe that it has implications far beyond this. The fact is, a shift towards online work was already happening before the pandemic. And now that it has accelerated, we shouldn't expect it's just going to completely go away. Many students are going to have jobs that are remote, just like many of us on this call. So before I jump into the work, I'll just tell you a bit of how we did this. So we did a lot of consultation throughout the sector, including with some of you here on this call. And we developed 3 surveys for employers, students, and WIL administrators across Ontario, because we felt in order to fully understand what was happening, we needed a 360-degree view, if you will, of all of the major stakeholders that are involved. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So what did we find? So I will note a lot of these are early findings, but for the most part, I will say that WIL is working. Students like the newfound flexibility with online WIL. They like that they can save money on transport costs, and they like some of the delivery methods of course content. I heard someone earlier mention universal design for learning, this is one of the ways of giving people multiple ways of engaging with material. However, there were some clear areas for improvement for our sector to act upon. I'll just share a few of these findings. So we asked all students about the main challenges they faced in the past year. And by far the 2 biggest were mental health and a work-life school balance. 6 out of 10 students said that these were major challenges for them in the past year. And about the same number of students said that making friends and staying motivated were challenges that they're currently facing. Taken together with several very high-profile recent education studies that suggest the possibility of a crisis in students' sense of connection and well-being. Students with disabilities were also twice as likely to say that they encountered barriers to entering WIL in the application process itself, which suggests that institutions should think about how accessible the WIL application process currently is. Students also said that they struggled with staying motivated, getting meaningful tasks, and understanding the expectations for their online WIL. And all of these factors were far more pronounced among online or hybrid WIL placements than in-person WIL placements. So that points us to a very direct type of WIL that we might want to think about improving those qualities. Interestingly, most WIL administrators said that their leadership supports online WIL, that their department has developed a framework for online WIL, yet WIL administrators overwhelmingly said that they have not been given the resources to match these good intentions. So to that end, 2 out of 3 WIL administrators across Ontario said that their workloads became less manageable. And among those who said that advertising was impacted, 9 out of 10 said that it made reaching out to students for WIL opportunities harder. And 7 out of 10 administrators felt that it negatively affected their students' WIL experiences. Next slide, please. So one of the other significant things that is coming out of this research was among classic skill development. So we're talking critical thinking, problem solving, interpersonal skills. We observed a trend that students who did WIL in person were more likely to say that they felt satisfied with their skill development than those who did it online or hybrid. In general, about 80 to 90% of students felt that they developed skills such as interpersonal skills, critical thinking, technical skills. But when we asked employers the same question about their students, only 50% of employers at most said the same about their students. Employers are saying that they think that their students can develop transferable skills and that their students develop all sorts of technical skills, but it's the transferable skill development of their students that they seem rather down on. For example, about 8 out of 10 employers say that online WIL does develop transferable skills in theory, but when asked about their students specifically, just 3 out of 10 said they felt their students develop interpersonal skills, and just half said the same about their students for critical thinking. Those numbers were worsened for students who had an online WIL placement compared to their in-person peers. We think it would be important to interrogate why employers feel this way and what is it that they think that should be done to address that. Clearly, providing students with lots of technical skill opportunities is not equating to the sense they are developing transferable skills. Why is that? And what are students seeing that their employers are not, and vice versa? So next slide, please. So the second project that I want to talk about is on WIL and equity. And before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that in every single conversation we had with folks working on WIL in the sector, almost every single person said this was at the top, if not near the top, of the area they want to see the government do some more work on. We recognize the challenges that many of you have in the way that WIL data is collected. And we also understand that sometimes the way that data is collected, when it even isn't done in a way that makes it useful. So we were left with a big challenge. How do we research equity if the data isn't really there? We saw this as an opportunity to make a policy and recommendation forward report that can ask a question. What does equity, diversity, inclusion, and access look like in WIL in Ontario? And what should it look like? And what do people need to be able to make that a reality? Next slide, please. So again, just a very few findings, very high level. So when it came to issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, we observed a pointedly mixed picture that points to a lot of room, and I will also note a desire for improvement. So and this is important because 4 out of 10 students in our survey said that they worked in a WIL placement that had a bad work culture. 4 out of 10. 1 out of 6 said that they were made to feel uncomfortable. 1 in 5 said they felt that they were ignored by others. And in general, just half of students said they participated in EDI training, which is a bit troublesome since the majority of all students said that they experienced barriers during their WIL. WIL administrators recognize the shortcoming on EDI, but a lot of folks are not sure what to do about it. We heard that most staff just don't know who to ask or how to go about doing it, speaking to the need to have more organized EDI efforts at an institutional level, in addition to within WIL departments. Despite this, 80% of WIL administrators said that they would feel comfortable asking about EDI, which suggests that if institutions had clear lines of communication with regards to EDI, WIL administrators would be more than willing to engage on this issue. To emphasize this, just 19% of WIL administrators across Ontario said that their departments and offices are doing enough on EDI. And again, only 20% say the same number about their institutions, showing that this is a systemic problem. I think this number should probably alarm all of us because surely in 2022, we can do a lot better. But to that end, WIL administrators and their staff have clearly identified what they think is needed to make WIL more accessible. And I'll just share a few of the measures that we heard. And we've heard this throughout today. More mentorship in WIL, so more clearly defined mentorship roles in WIL placements, providing distinct and shareable and replicable guidelines around EDI, and providing more accommodations for physical workspaces. But to do this, what we heard is that people need more staffing and resources. And equally as cited was that close to 60% of WIL administrators said that they believe one of the best ways to improve EDI is to have a dedicated role for someone to work on access in EDI. And with that, and again, those are just a few of our findings. We're still doing analyses and we'll have full reports, hopefully by the end of the summer and early fall. But that was just a bit of a preview of some of the work we're doing. And I'll pass it back to Amy.
Thank you so much, Ken, for that overview. As you've heard, we're just digging in. We've got lots more to explore, but we already have a few things that are sort of rising to the top for us. One is that we shouldn't just go back to normal. There's a lot of that we've learned from this process that we can utilize moving forward, and that there are some proactive systems of support that we need to try and embed for supporting student well-being and mental health. And I know we're a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sean. Thanks everyone so much for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ken and Amy, and everyone who has participated. We have been responding to your questions in the Q&A as we've been going along. Unfortunately, we're out of time to discuss them publicly, or sorry, in this forum here, but if you can still put them in the Q&A, we'll respond while we move on to the next part, where I'm going to turn it over to Charlene to just bring us into the wind-up time frame of the symposium. Okay, so this isn't the end. This was to inspire. All right, and the inspiration encourages us just to keep going, but we keep chasing the clock here, unfortunately, because we've got to get you finished by the top of the hour. So I'm going to turn over to Charlene to bring a spotlight.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sean, and thanks to everyone who's presented. And before I turn things over to my colleagues and board members, Amanda and Dario, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of the work that is happening with the CEWIL Innovation Hub. And so for those of you that don't know, we received Government of Canada funding near $17 million this year. And through that, we have been able to support just around 4,600 actual iWill experiences in colleges and polytechnics. And that made up about $4.6 million worth of funding. So some really wonderful things are happening in the college sector. We had 41 institutions, colleges and polytechnics, and 94 projects thus far. So all that to say that we are super excited to see what's happening in colleges and polytechnic sector. And I would like to turn it over to our board members and college reps from CEWIL, Amanda Malkovich and Dario Gassini. Sorry, Dario, I always pronounce your name incorrectly. Got to work on the Italian/Spanish.
You
Getting
said
there.
it.
I said it.
Gassini, yeah, always right. You're always right. Amanda, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, Dario. So thank you, everyone. Thank you truly for joining today's event and on inspiring will in Canadian colleges and polytechnics. So many valuable insights shared through thought leadership panels, a session on provincial funding and will, faculty engagement, emerging research, and of course, Charlene's research iHub Spotlight. Just a few takeaways from today's session that I thought I would share after listening to all these wonderful speakers throughout this afternoon. Found that colleges and polytechnics have long been recognized as leaders and supporters of will, so no surprise there. And in this changing world, will has never been more important than it is now. Will truly changes students' lives. Their experiences help them to determine career paths, develop networks, and support a higher rate of postgraduate employment. We've learned that advocacy, collaboration, and strong industry and educational partnerships regarding will is imperative to growing, funding, and prioritizing our will. Will can also occur very effectively in many formats, whether it's centralized, decentralized, faculty, or program-led. And as practitioners, we can aid these faculty members by sharing will definitions, developing will models, creating open source resources, and securing funding to build these new will activities and projects. What we've also heard is that emerging research in will is providing theoretical frameworks to validate, to explore, and to improve our field. And last but not least, our iHub funding has challenged and changed colleges and polytechnics to be creative and innovate will and opportunities for students across Canada. And to close, I found one main question to ponder as we continue to think about will is how we can transform will and support EDI, entrepreneurship, SME, and large employers, and our ever-changing student populations that we encourage lifelong learners. And now I'll turn it over to Dario.
thank you, Amanda, for the great recap. I want those notes, and we should be sharing those notes with the rest of the team here. That was excellent recap, Amanda. Thank you very much. I want to answer in 1 minute. I want to answer 2 questions. Why now this symposium, and what's next? Why now? Amanda and I, as you may know, are the college representatives at the board of CEWIL. We brought up the fact that we wanted to make an emphasis on the great work that colleges and polytechnics and institutes are doing in Canada when it comes to WIL practices. So we felt that today was just the start of great conversations ahead when it comes to the incredible work that we, all of you, are doing when it comes to WIL and experiential practices for our students. So that's the why now, but what's next? We would love to, and Sean and Charlene and Amanda, myself, have been talking about this, and we would like to continue this. This is just a kickoff to many conversations, and maybe what we are planning of doing is to have a white paper around the conversations that we had today that we would love to share with all of you, share the best practices that were shared today, and more best practices coming along the way. Charlene talked a little bit about the iHub and all the incredible practices that colleges and polytechnics have been able to implement thanks to the funding received through CEWIL. So we don't want to stop the conversation today. We're going to continue this. Hopefully this is the first of many to come. Sean, that's a message to you. And let's continue doing this work. And I would love to thank you, all of you, for joining us today. I felt that we had an incredible day with the opening panelists moderated by Matt, our president of CEWIL. And I'm looking forward to continue in this great work with all of you. Thank you, and have an amazing rest of the week.